Tonight on Cross Currents, lightning out of Lebanon. A journey inside the tragic, war-torn country that continues to hold Western hostages. Who are the players in this complex nightmare? And is the balance of power now shifting to a new and more threatening force? Cross Currents with Jim Carney.
For most of us, the very word Beirut immediately triggers images of death and destruction, and the word Lebanon a sense of political and social disarray that is beyond comprehension. The collapse of Lebanon over the past 30 years has no parallel in post-war history. It was the jewel of the Middle East. In the 1950s and early 60s, Beirut was on a par with Paris and Rome. Lebanon was a businessman's heaven, playground for the rich and beautiful. It is now a country so devastated, so chaotic, and so dangerous, only a fool would confidently predict its future. The tragedy of Lebanon is all the more striking when one realizes how tiny a country it is, about 1/4 the size of Vancouver Island. From its southern border with Israel to Syria in the north is about the distance from Victoria to Carney. Its average width about the distance from Vancouver to Mission. Within that tiny area, there is a narrow coastal strip, then the Lebanon Mountains towering to 11,000 feet, then the Central Plateau or Bekaa Valley, and then the eastern Lebanon Mountains bordering on Syria. Lebanon sits at the intersection of 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, the interface of a series of major civilizations, most of which, in terms of longevity, dwarf our own. The Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, Assyrians, Greeks, Romans, Persians. It inevitably became a crossroads and meeting place, a mosaic of fragmented ethnic groups, religions, political ideologies, and points of view, constantly subjected to an extraordinary range of internal and external pressures. The Lebanon of today, in terms of its political boundaries, is barely 70 years old. It was created by the French in 1920 as Greater Lebanon, centered around a mountainous inland area inhabited primarily by Maronite Christians and Druze Muslims. To this was added the coastal regions and cities, including Beirut and the Bekaa Valley, inhabited largely by Sunni and Shiite Muslims. And there you have the first of the 3 basic dimensions to Lebanon's predicament today. The conflict between a multifaceted Christian community dominated by Maronite Christians who control the political and economic structures and dream of an independent but westward-looking Lebanon, and an equally diverse Muslim community who resent the economic and political overlordship of the Christians and look eastward to the Arab world. Within Lebanon itself, then, there is an almost infinite potential for conflict and violence between the various sects, factions, and families. The second basic dimension of Lebanon's predicament is the presence of the Palestinians. The plight of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon is a tragedy in itself, but more devastating yet has been the use of Lebanon by the PLO as a base from which to attack Israel and as a place to train their terrorist squads. This has precipitated retaliation from Israel, most tragically the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, an adventure which devastated Lebanon and nearly tore Israel apart. Much of the Lebanese population, especially the Maronite Christians, deeply resent the Palestinians' presence. But there is little they can do about it, and the Palestinians have some powerful friends. For instance, the Syrians. Syria provides the 3rd key dimension to the dilemma that is Lebanon. Syrian troops went into Lebanon in 1976, ostensibly to save the country from yet another civil war. They've been there ever since. Why? Well, number 1, Syria has a long history, going back to Roman times, as the dominant power in this region. They'd like to keep it that way. In addition, modern Syria is a geographically large but economically poor country with a leftist government, ties to the Soviet Union, and a strident anti-Israel posture to maintain. All this makes it difficult to do business with the West. Lebanon, however, used to be a small, rich country doing a lot of business with the West, a veritable Switzerland of the Middle East. A stable, prosperous, and docile Lebanon could do Syria a world of good. But Syria faces a dilemma. She does not want to see a strong, pro-Western government in Lebanon, which might slam the door in her face, but at the same time, she shudders at the prospect of the rabble-rousing Shiites and Palestinians running things. Above all, Syria wants to keep Lebanon within her sphere of influence, and that means not allowing a vacuum to develop and not provoking Israel. Tonight on Cross Currents, American journalist Barbara Newman adds yet another frightening dimension to the tragedy of Lebanon: the spread of Muslim fundamentalism from Iran, proselytized by the followers of Ayatollah Khomeini through the Party of God, the Hezbollah. Her trip takes us to Baalbek in the Bekaa Valley, headquarters of the Hezbollah, where many of the Western hostages are believed to be held. It's a fascinating journey. Now, lightning out of Lebanon.
Bekaa means green, and for centuries this has been the breadbasket of Lebanon. It's a very large area covering about a fifth of Lebanese territory, right from the Mount Lebanon range east of Beirut up to the Syrian borders. We are among the first Western journalists to visit here since 1979, when the Iranian Revolutionary Guards first came to the area and made their presence felt. There are reports that other Westerners have been here and may still be here. These are the hostages. This reporter has had a rather long history with Lebanon, and it is only through contacts made over years that one feels relatively secure. But there are no guarantees for anyone for safety in the Bekaa Valley. I last flew into Beirut for a funeral. It was 1982. My friend Bashir Gemayel had been assassinated just 2 weeks before he was to be inaugurated as president of Lebanon. I had known him for 2.5 years. He was the most charismatic man I'd ever met.
All what we are looking for is a strong central government, a strong central army for a strong Lebanon, free Lebanon, friendly to the West, friendly to the Occident, to the free world, a Lebanon who will never be another Afghanistan or another Poland.
For me, Bashir's death was a personal catastrophe. It was a catastrophe for Lebanon, too. A new wave of terrorism started in the country. Like everyone I knew, I used to have a deep pit in my stomach when I saw the Beirut airport out of the window of the plane. But I always knew Bashir would be there, and his soldiers would whisk me away to safety. Now it's different. For me, there will always be a sadness in the air, returning to a country I loved, a country which is destroying itself. I felt almost compelled to come back, to see what changes war had wrought, and try to get close and to understand this land that has claimed so many hostages. There are 7,500 Syrian troops in Beirut, and the first glimpse of the airport brought home to me the extent of Syrian control of Lebanon. Syrian soldiers now guard the area where more than 250 American Marines died less than 5 years ago. Six of the 24 Western hostages, 1/4 of all of them seized in Lebanon, were taken right here on this road. This is the Beirut International Airport Road, and even in a land where extremities of brutality are commonplace, this road is infamous. This is a country at war, even fractionalized, where Christian kills Christian and Muslim kills Muslim before they get around to killing each other. But it took Hezbollah, the terror organization sponsored by Iran, to bring this terror right to the doorstep of the West. A new terrorism has come to Lebanon. It is terrorism from the Shiite community that targets the West. The Shiites are a Muslim sect, a minority in the Muslim world, but a majority in Lebanon. Nevertheless, they are economically the most disadvantaged group. Now they look to Iran, the leading Shiite nation, for guidance. This is the Shiite stronghold in Beirut. For Westerners, it's strictly out of bounds. We tried to get as close as possible, but even this turned out to be too close for comfort. We're at the border of the southern suburbs and West Beirut. The southern suburbs are right over there. We went to the edge, just where the mounds of dirt are, and snipers were sniping on us, so we pulled back to this position. And this happened although we're here with very, very heavy security, and it gives you an idea just how precarious the situation is ringing the Shiite section of West Beirut. The Shiite southern suburbs in yellow are part of the Muslim sector of West Beirut. The Christians live on the other side in East Beirut. A green line divides the city in two. The only pedestrian crossing point is open sporadically, depending on the level of hostilities between Christians and Muslims, and also within the Shiite community itself. In all my years of reporting, this is one of the most depressing sights I've ever seen. In front of me was proof of the disintegration of a country. To get from one side of their city to another, these people, loaded down with their few possessions, must pass through 5 separate checkpoints. But once you manage to get across, there are no guarantees that you'll get back. You're looking at a powder keg, a dangerous no man's land, 250,000 Shiites and 10 to 15 hostages, hemmed in by the surrounding Syrian army. The Syrians have made a political decision not to go in. As one intelligence officer told me, we're not going to be dragged in for fear of mobilizing the Shiites against us and endangering the lives of the hostages. While filming, we heard stories of the imminent release of a German businessman and of Terry Waite. The reports stem from 2 factors. First, the considerations of his bad heart. It's thought that further incarceration could cause his death. He's been a prisoner since January the 20th, and we're told that he's being held in the southern suburbs of Beirut, in the same general vicinity where Charles Glass was held. The second factor in these reports is that the Christian Lebanese forces has arrested 4 Iranian diplomats, and the Iranians are bargaining the release of Waite for the return of their diplomats. Here in Lebanon, political hostage-taking and hostage-freeing has reached new political currency, with human beings being traded as if they were any other commodity of value. On the 7th of September, German hostage Alfred Schmidt was released. There were rumors of a ransom payment of £2 million. Terry Waite was not released. Our intelligence sources told us he would be among the last to be freed because of the deterioration in relations between London and the Syrians, the middlemen in this nightmare. This was the start of a 2-week journey into the Bekaa Valley. I had always heard that the Bekaa was where the most dangerous terrorist organizations in the world had their headquarters and training camps. Entrance into the Bekaa is through the town of Shtora. For a reporter, it was a journey of a lifetime, but it was begun with great trepidation. As Terry Waite and the other hostages found out, there are no absolute guarantees for safety in Lebanon for anyone, and I, as a Western journalist, would be considered a great prize. With these thoughts in mind, I got my first glimpse of the Bekaa Valley. This isn't London, Paris, or New York. This is the Royal Shora Hotel, address Northeast Bekaa Valley. Shora is the strategic entrance to the Bekaa. The main road in the region, the Beirut-Damascus Highway, passes right through this town. The hotel has been closed now for 7 years, and its beautiful furnishings are just sitting covered up. The owner fears that if he were open, the militias would take it over, wreck the place, and then not pay the bills. But you wouldn't know any of this by talking to some of the local residents. Just wait and see what's around the corner. We arrived at this pool under heavily armed guard. I felt as if I had gone through a time warp. I had come to the gateway city to the Valley of Death, expecting to find hell on earth, and instead I found myself on a Hollywood movie set. It's hard to believe that people can have such self-induced amnesia about the oppressive circumstances of life, within just a stone's throw of the headquarters of two major PLO groups and the regional headquarters of the most dangerous terrorists on earth. In real life, some of these people are businessmen, others are smugglers selling consumer goods illegally to neighboring countries. All of them are living in a dream world. You come here often?
Oh yeah, I come here every day. It's a very beautiful place, you know. We like to swim, you know, and come down here to play backgammon, see a lot of friends.
Since there have been so much trouble in Lebanon, Bekaa has been the best place, you know, no bombs, no terrorism, nothing like that. So we come from Beirut to spend our summer in Bekaa because it's so safe up here.
You really feel that?
Yes, I do.
The terrorist camps are about just miles away.
No, I don't believe in that. There's nothing, and I don't believe there's terrorism in Bekaa because I could have felt it if there was.
But there have been shellings?
There have been, yes. I'm not saying there haven't been. There have been, but in specific places, you know. There have been shells, and I have been in this country 18 years, and I haven't been dead, you know. I'm okay, I'm fine.
From Shtora, we headed 10 kilometers north towards the Christian city of Zahli. The Bekaa Valley is an invader's paradise. The Romans were the first to come. They built a spectacular city here. The ruins seem to me to stretch on for miles. But now it's the time of the Syrians, who've transformed the Roman architecture into a secure fortress. The soldiers were off duty. So you're Syrian soldiers stationed here among these ancient Roman ruins in Anjar. How long have you been here?
انتم من الجيش السوري عايشين هون بأثارات عنجر، قد ايه صار لكم هون؟
تقريبا فترة مو قليلة.
Quite a long period of time.
هذا شيء 8 سنوات. هاي شيء 8 سنوات.
About 8 years.
8 years? Do you ever get to go home?
هل عم بتروحوا على بيتكم، عم ترجعوا على بيوتكم؟
إيه طبعا، ولو إنه هون يعني الأرض مثل بيوتنا كمان. يعني ما اختلف علينا شيء.
Here it's like home. It's not very much different, but we do go home.
But what about his family?
بالنسبة لعيالكم، عم تشتاقوا لعيالكم، عيالكم مشتاقة لكم، عم بتشوفوا عيالكم؟
أكيد عم نشوفهم باستمرار.
Yes, we see our families from time to time.
There's people talk about the Syrians and the Syrian army. Sometimes they act like they're afraid of them. Do people act as if they're afraid of you?
أوقات الناس بيخافوا، بيبينوا كأنه خايفين من الجيش السوري. هل بتشوفوا إنه الناس خايفين منكم؟ هل بيتصرفوا كأنه خايفين من الجيش السوري؟
أبداً بالعكس، يعني ما عم نلاقي إلا كل ترحيب وكل اطمئنان من كافة الناس الموجودين. يعني مو بس هون، بكل كافة مناطق لبنان.
He says no, not at all.
تعامل العرب مع بعضهم أكيد ما في مصدر. بعدين إحنا موجودين هون لحفظ السلام أو لطمأنينة بين الناس.
He says no, not at all. On the contrary, we have always been very much welcomed by people, and we feel that they are rested when they see us. This is relations between Arabs, between each other, so this is always what we have been met with.
The vast cloudless skies and the tranquil appearance of the Bekaa Valley was deceptive. Our car was surrounded by 5 others filled with heavily armed guards who we were forbidden to film. This is the town of Zahli, perched high above the Bekaa Valley. It's a bastion of Christian interest in the Middle East with a population of about 200,000. The people came here years ago to avoid persecution and feudalism in the area and also to enjoy the tremendous economic opportunities of this fertile valley. Life here, though, has never been easy for the people here. In 1860, the entire population was massacred and the city razed by the Druze, a Muslim sect. In 1981 and 84, fighting broke out between the Christians here and Syria and its Muslim allies, including the PLO. A ceasefire has taken effect, but the war has had its toll. This is the first film of the Syrian guardians of the Christian city of Zahli. They are red-hot crack troops. 2 years ago, they were the most feared enemy. Now they alone keep the peace. Because today in the Bekaa Valley, the Christians and the Syrians have joined hands to combat the growing power of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. The checkpoints are effective. Terrorist activities have been restricted to the occasional car bomb, but the cost is high. Zakhli is effectively under siege. The Catholic Church represents most of the people in Zakhli. In the Middle East, where religion and politics are one and the same, Archbishop Andrei Haddad is both spiritual leader and political mentor.
From 1985, when we have the accord with Syrian army here, we live in security and in the peace. Our people can go to their land, can go to Beirut, to all countries of Bekaa in safety. And here in Zakhli also we live in safety. So we don't feel hostility against Syria. But it does not mean that we want the control eternal of Syria. We want our independence. It is natural. Everyone wants his independence.
For the last 2 years, time in Zakhli has stood still. The cars are getting older. Traffic control is non-existent. The petrol is drying up. The shops are a bleak reminder of a former glory, well stocked with symbols of affluence which no one can now afford. This shop assistant hasn't seen a customer for 2 weeks. Public services have almost ceased to exist. On a good day, water is on for 2 hours. On bad days, it's recycled. Our baths were turned into storage tanks. Consequently, everyone gets sick. Typhoid fever, Maltese fever, and dysentery are chronic. First appearances are deceptive. There is food in the shops, but no one can afford to buy it. Last week, bread went up almost 100%. So many stores have closed down. Zakhli was once a leading Middle Eastern city. To find out what it's like to live there now under these circumstances, I went to visit with the Stefan family. Their apartment is in the better part of town, and it overlooks this once thriving metropolis. The Stefans look comfortably off, but their standard of living is tumbling down. 22-year-old Rabia is studying to become a dentist. Rola, 17, is studying computer science. They live in this beautiful house, trapped in a place with an uncertain future.
En fait, dans l'avenir, on espère toujours que la situation sera meilleure, parce que c'est quand même notre pays, on préfère vivre ici.
In the future, we hope that the situation will get better, because finally this is our country and we prefer to live here.
I think we have really the taste of war here. In Beirut, they are not living like us. They have sometimes some distractions or things, but they are living, they go to pictures, they go to theaters. Here there's nothing to do, because there's the Syrians here, and we don't know. There's a lot of complications.
Do you feel you can get along with Muslims here?
Vous pensez que vous pouvez vous entendre avec les musulmans dans
Oui,
les cas?
pourquoi pas. Oui.
Yes, why not?
Oui, pourquoi pas. Il y a des modérés partout
There are moderates everywhere,
et des extrémistes partout.
and there are extremists.
Si c'est le temps des extrémistes, et on les emploie pour des raisons qu'on ne connaît pas, mais...
It is the extremists that are employed for reasons that we do not know.
Your mother talked about how horrible it was in '81,
Yeah.
especially. You were how old then?
I was 10 or 11.
What do you remember?
I remember the sounds of bombs. I remember some cries. I remember my friends, some of my friends who died. I remember some awful things. I don't like it.
Your mother said it marked everybody.
Yes.
Have a lot of your friends been killed in the last few years?
Vous avez beaucoup de vos amis qui ont été tués?
Must be horrible.
Oui. Il y a des familles entières qui ont été exterminées.
The entire family is thoroughly destroyed.
When you walk around the streets here, does it remind you of where people you know died?
Oui, certainement. Certainement, dans toutes les circonstances.
Yes, surely, in all circumstances.
Il n'y a pas longtemps de ça pour essayer d'oublier. Surtout
It hasn't been a long time ago. We cannot yet forget.
I wondered about the feelings of Mrs. Stefan, about the world bequeathed to her daughter, who's the same age as mine. One growing up amidst war and horror, the other with safety and security. While the terrorists in the Bekaa Valley are being kept at bay by the Syrian crack troops, peace negotiations have started between two traditional enemies, the Christians and the Muslims. The futility of 15 years of war has finally begun to sink in. Eli Hobeika is a Christian warlord, one of the toughest fighters in the Christian camp. Now he's looking for a way forward.
I realized that someone had to break this vicious circle, and it has to be a Christian. Because, as I said, also in the Muslim community, leaders were mobilizing people out of fear. They were telling everyone that Christians with Israelis, with Americans, with the Europeans were trying to eliminate the Islamic population or community in Lebanon. And fear was the main mobilizing element in Lebanon. The fear of the Christians from the Muslim and the fear of the Muslims from the Christians. And someone had to break this vicious circle. And we thought, and I thought, that the Lebanese forces as an institution had to break this vicious circle. This is why we need a foreign influence, a foreign power. Christians once tried Israel, and it didn't work. It brought up war once more, and this is what happened in '82. They came, they broke the Palestinian political and war machine, and they brought up another kind of struggle between minorities, Christians against Jews and all others. What we see now in Syria as a positive force in Lebanon, we see a role, and this role is based on bringing all those factions to dialogue, to negotiate, without having to bring their weapons with.
The tragedy of the situation is that the Christians are now in the midst of a civil war. The Lebanese forces in East Beirut under Samir Jaja are determinedly against any dealings with Syria. A reign of terror has split the community. These two brothers are victims. Gilbert Baz is a member of the Eli Hobeika forces, and while we were in Lebanon, his father was taken hostage.
ولما راحوا على المستشفى ليشوفوه على مستشفى الكارانتينا كانوا ناطرين ليشوفوا مين راح يجي يشوفه لحتى كمان يعتقلوه او اذا كان حزبي او تابع لنا. بقى شافوا صاحبي لبيي على زعيمه من هون في علامه انه مشنوق شد على زعيمه واجريه مبينين انه معرضينه للكهرباء مزرقين كلهم دم.
So when they went to the hospital, they found out that the people, the militiamen, were waiting there to see who would come to see the body. And this friend of his sister saw the body, and the body had marks on the throat. He had been strangled, and his feet were blue. He had been exposed to torture with electricity.
Your father, you told me, was 67 years old.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a civil war in the Christian community between the head of the Lebanese forces now, Samir Jaja, and you're with the forces of Eli Hobeika, who used to be the head and was ousted in a coup d'etat in January. And this is what Is your story unique? Are you the only one this has happened to, or do you know of other stories like this?
هل شيء صار لكم لحالكم أما صار مع غير ناس وعارفين بغير ناس؟
لا، في كتير ناس عذبون تحت. في شاب عمره 24 سنة قطشوا له أصابعه وكبوه.
There are many people with whom it has happened. There's a boy that I know who's 24 years old. They cut his finger off and then they threw him away.
وفي شباب حطوا لهم قتلوهم، حطوا لهم تقيلات بإجريهم كبوهم بالبحر.
And there are other young men that they have thrown in the sea with cement on their feet, cement blocks on their feet.
Was your father a political activist?
بيا كان يشتغل سياسي شيء؟
No. لا أبدا ما كان حزبي وما كانت مقطوشة إيده.
My father was an invalid and he was not at all a party member of any party.
Samir Jaja is now in Beirut as head of the Lebanese forces. He's mutilating, killing, torturing the families of people who are with you. You're not fighting back, which is people who know you historically find that hard to believe.
That I'm not fighting
Right.
back. Yeah, because when you talk peace, you cannot bring up war means. He's killing people because they are against his policy. He's killing people because he thinks that they are traitors. What is a traitor for this kind of leader? This is someone who doesn't believe in what that leader is saying and who thinks the contrary. We cannot do the same. We cannot use terrorism to implement a peaceful policy. This is out of question. It doesn't come with our policy. We cannot do it. It's against every logic. We are saying that outside the Christian areas, there is no danger facing the Christians. And we made our own experience in the Bekaa Valley, what you call the Valley of Death, with all these Hezbollahs here, with all those parties, with even those Palestinian organizations. And we are living here. We are not surviving. We are not living by the means of guns. We don't go with guns all around and try to preserve ourselves by fights or struggles. We are living like a human being should live.
Do you think we can get our hostages back in the West?
If you can get your hostages back, we don't feel here the danger of the hostages as you feel it. We feel here a greater danger than that. We feel we are afraid for our country. We're not afraid for those 5 or 6 or 8 people. We have to face a greater danger. Hezbollah for us represents a very great danger for the integrity, for the future of Lebanon.
So you think they still may take additional hostages?
Of course. Unless, now I think it's less possible because of Syrian influence. Like what happened with Glass. He was taken hostage, but because he was taken from under the nose of the Syrians, Syria had made a lot of pressures in order to bring the Hezbollah to release him, and he was released.
What kind of pressures does Syria bear on these people?
Military pressures.
You mean that they'll go and take an action against them?
They had taken an action against them when they entered Beirut. They fought them, and Hezbollah had to pay with 23 of his men. And now all the roadblocks in Lebanon are Syrian checkpoints. They are making real checking on every Hezbollah, if he's carrying weapons, if he's moving some hostage. Now the Hezbollah are no more a free organization in Lebanon. They are going underground.
Now I was determined to see for myself where this underground support for Iranian-sponsored terrorism was coming from. From the Christian center of Zahli, we headed south towards Mushkara, deep in the stronghold of the ruthless Hezbollah organization. Our convoy was doubled to 10 cars and 40 guards, all on full alert. But I made them stop at what for me was a startling sight. Hashish as far as the eye can see. Many things have changed because of the war. But one thing has remained constant, that this hashish is the area's largest export product. And now we hear that the Hezbollah gets a great deal of its money to support terrorist operations from exporting this crop all over the world. Right next door was a reminder of biblical times. These Bedouin people, Muslims, were friendly to their visitors from the West. And for the first and the only time in the Bekaa Valley, I felt free. Even our guards appeared to relax. They allowed us to stay for 3 hours. For a brief time, these Bedouin people shared their lives with us, so that we almost forgot where we were. They made us feel welcome. We were hungry, and they offered us their food. Then they shared their music with us. But all too soon, it was time to go. If I had known what was to come, we would have stayed a lot longer. Mushkara appeared stark, almost like a medieval fortress. Flags flying in the wind, signs of allegiance to Hezbollah. It was inhospitable to foreigners. No smiles greeted us here. The faces on even the children were long. We noticed no one playing. The men threatened us with their eyes. Our cameraman had to film through an open roof. For the first time on this journey, our guards, crack frontline troops, were frightened. The contrast with the Bedouin could not have been greater. This beautiful land seemed marred beyond the point of no return by the ugliness of politics. Here the people were sullen and remote. The only sound we heard was the call to prayer from the mosque that echoed through this mountain village. The signs of politics were everywhere, the propaganda of hatred. At one point, the car stalled and would not restart for a full 8 minutes. It seemed like an eternity. The banners with slogans, symbols of support for Hezbollah, filled the sky. Their flapping in the wind only drew attention to the silence of the people. Posters of martyrs to the Hezbollah cause of suicide fighters seemed to be everywhere. I remember women sitting like statues, resenting our intrusion, all clad head to foot in the Islamic garment called the chador. We left with a sense of relief. After we left, we talked to a Shiite couple. They told us how over the last 7 years, Hezbollah has imposed itself on their community.
He's saying that some people have proposed money so that he makes his wife wear chador, and the sums were quite interesting.
Why don't you take the money and make her wear it?
كل إنسان عنده قناعة بحاله.
Each person has his own convictions.
أنا مثلا مرتي بعترك لها الحرية مثل ما بدها.
My wife, I leave her free to do what she wants.
Do you know of your neighbors or people you know in the village who bad things have happened to who oppose these groups?
بتعرف ناس بضيعتك صار لهم هالشيء؟
يعني أكيد ما بيخلى لأنه عم نسمع كثير.
We are hearing a lot.
أكيد ما بيخلى الأمر لأنه عم نسمع كثير أشياء غريبة.
We are hearing many strange things.
What type of strange things?
شو مثلا؟
مثلا يكون واحد نفترض حامل مصاري بيروح بيقتلوه على الطريق مثلا.
For example, someone who goes out of his house with some money, they might kill him on the way.
خي اللي حاصل عنا بلبنان لا ايمان ولا شيء، كله هيك عن غيره وعن قبض مادي وبس.
What is happening here in Lebanon does not have anything to do with faith or lack of faith. It is the result of ambition and the result of money and wanting to take money.
Are there Iranians living in your village?
في إيرانيين بضيعتك؟
إيرانيين مش موجودين بالضيعة، في ضيعة حد منا موجودين فيها.
There's a village next to ours in which the
حد
Iranians
الضيعة.
are. They are not in
في
my
إيرانيين.
village.
But they check on what's happening in yours.
كيف؟ شو بيحصل؟
But they check on what's happening in your village.
بيأثروا على اللي عم بيصير بضيعتك.
أكيد هلا في أشخاص عم ينسقوا لإلهم، وهالأشخاص هودي مثل عم يبصوا مثل دعاية، كيف؟ هالأشخاص هودي معروفين من قبلنا نحن كأولاد بلد. في ناس عم ترفضهم، وأكيد الأشخاص الثانيين مثلا اللي بحاجة وعم يلاقوا إنه عم يستفيدوا، عم يميلوا لإلهم.
Well, there are people who are veering towards them, and they come back and they do a sort of a propaganda for them. And there are others who see that they are making a lot with them, so they follow them.
But among most of the people, is there a hostility towards the West?
الشعور إنه أغلب الناس بيكرهوا الغرب.
مش أغلب الناس، لا مش أغلب الناس. في عندك نسبة قليلة مثلا اللي بيكونوا هذا اللي بنقول لهم أكيد اللي مستعملين الدين ومتكمشين بالدين كتير. هودي في نقول فكرتهم مش كره موجود، فكرتهم إنه بيكرهوا الغرب.
No, not most of the people. Not most of the people. A very, very small amount among them. There are those who are grabbing onto religion, and those are the ones who we can say hate the West.
The last leg of our journey was the most dangerous. We were heading for Baalbek, the most feared city in Lebanon. This was the most perilous journey I have ever taken. On the way, I saw a military position of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. An intense fear was shared by all of us. Ayatollah Khomeini stared down on us from Urals. There was an evil energy about this place. We passed the main Hezbollah headquarters, destroyed in 1982 by the French in retaliation for the suicide attack on their military headquarters in Beirut. Over 50 French soldiers had been killed there. Baalbek, the center of Iranian operations in Lebanon. We were rushed to a highly guarded area. The cars were hidden, and I was put in a pit where my bodyguards hoped I could not be seen. We were allowed to stay for just 5 minutes. No Westerner and no journalist can enter here, and anyone who comes would probably be arrested within hours. About 400 Iranians and 300 pro-Iranian Lebanese security people keep that city tight as a drum. This reporter had to take extraordinary security precautions just to come to this spot right here. And being here, one feels like one is living in the eye of a hurricane. One's not sure what will happen next. It's thought that perhaps some of the hostages might be right here in this city right now. Baalbek is ringed by the Syrians, who, like in Beirut, keep out for fear of getting involved in a war with Iran and endangering the lives of the hostages. From our vantage point, we could hurriedly make out some of the most notorious buildings in the world, among them the Sheikh Abdullah Barracks. This is the observation tower with radio antenna for direct communication with Iran. The administration and military headquarters. From here, instructions are sent to Beirut and the rest of Lebanon. The main barracks house 150 soldiers who guard the complex. Where is this place where you heard hostages were being held? This defector worked there for 2 years.
They are in a building that is composed of 3 stories with tiles on the roof and a light color.
This is part of the Sheikh Abdullah complex. Highly informed sources confirm that beneath this 3-story building, several hostages are being kept in an underground jail. These plans show us the position of their prison, the barracks, the watchtower, all of which is surrounded by a mined area. How many soldiers are there in the Sheikh Abdullah barracks?
كم جندي في بسكن الشيخ عبد الله؟
في 500 واحد مجاهد، 500 عنصر مجاهد، بس في من الإيرانيين بيدربوا.
There are about 500 elements called mujahid, but among them there are some Iranians who train them.
What's the training for?
شو هالتدريبات؟
في تدريبيات للمجاهدين الموجودين، في تدريبيات لقوات حسين الانتحارية بجنوب بيجاهدوا عمليات ضد إسرائيل، بيحاربوا ضد إسرائيل.
There are trainings for the mujahideen who are in those barracks, and there are trainings also for the Hussein forces, the suicide teams who go to South Lebanon for operations against Israel in the south.
Hezbollah means the party of God. This graphic illustrates the direct links between Hezbollah in Iran and its operations in Lebanon. The spiritual leader is based in Beirut. The head of military operations is in Baalbek. Hezbollah is an umbrella organization controlling this chilling array of terrorist groups. Professor Achar, in the West we're very concerned about the Western hostages held by Hezbollah, we heard, in Lebanon. Who is holding them and why are they being taken?
Let me introduce the question by saying that most of the Iranian elements that came to Lebanon came here under the pretext of assisting the Lebanese resistance movement. Once they established themselves here, and they managed to do that in Baalbek and other areas, they launched on a program of dramatizing their cause and the Iranian Revolution. In my judgment, they decided that taking Western hostages is the principal issue. Now, they did it for two reasons. One, to dramatize their cause and bypass the idea of Arabism and Lebanese revolution and focus on what they call the Islamic Revolution. And they did it under the Muntazari direction of exporting the revolution to Lebanon. So the hostages are victims of circumstance. Now, they particularly wanted French and American hostages to extort the American people and force the United States to sell weapons or give weapons to Iran.
So you're saying that the decision on hostage-taking is part and parcel of Iranian realpolitik and the projection of Iranian foreign policy?
Yes. It's, they proudly espouse this. I mean, what does Charles Glass or you as a journalist or any journalist have to do with their cause? You're coming here to report on what is transpiring here. They kidnap you. Why? Because you give them propaganda. What happened to them is they don't realize that their propaganda has been counterproductive. That's their problem.
If Ayatollah Khomeini answers only to God, Hezbollah's chief of military operations, Hossein Moussawi, answers only to Khomeini. He has the power of life and death over his followers and his adversaries. We arranged for a Lebanese journalist to interview Hossein Moussawi for us. This is the first interview with him since the Ayatollah Khomeini made him directly responsible for military operations in Lebanon.
What is the position of Hezbollah regarding the abduction of the foreign hostages? Those hostages, some of them are innocent, but others have been found guilty of spying and are related to the enemies of our nation. If there are innocent hostages in Lebanon, we are against holding them. But those who are linked to intelligence agencies, we are for their abduction, for hurting them, even for eliminating them if necessary. Dealing with this issue of abduction, if those abducted are truly spies, enemies of our nation, then abduction is in our interest, not against our interest.
The enemies of our nation must know that they will be punished one day. France, America, and Great Britain, this diabolical group, have a history of hostility towards the Muslims and the oppressed, especially in Asia and Africa. So the Muslims today have decided to defend themselves. The duty of the Muslims is to create the Islamic State throughout the world. It is not our duty alone, but the duty of all Muslims in Egypt, in Europe, and elsewhere. Do you believe this is realistic? Of course it is. Had there been journalists like you when the Prophet Muhammad, may God bless him, built the Islamic State, which now extends from China to Europe, they would have considered him unrealistic. But the Islamic State was born. It was a state that God had wanted. So all material obstacles will be abolished because of the sincerity of the people working to realize our aims, because God will help them.
At the end of his interview, Moussaoui said he wanted to address the West in English. He read from a prepared statement.
Your governments lying on you when they not tell you that the Muslims in Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan and Pakistan, Palestine, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, and all the Islamic countries, they will fight with the Islamic Republic and with Imam Khomeini if the USA explodes the battle with Iran in Gulf. If that happens, the fire will eat everything, and the people in USA and Europe will regret because they didn't prevent their governments to be enemy to the Islam and Muslims. So, what choice you will make? Our love and collaboration, or we find ourselves obliged to fire in every place, defending ourselves.
It was with mixed feelings that I left the Bekaa Valley. On the one hand, I couldn't wait to get out. On the other, I felt I was deserting the hostages who were so near, but so far from us, and whose fate is so uncertain. Pawns in the ugliest political game I have ever reported.
According to the United States State Department, there are now 15 hostages being held in Lebanon. 9 are American citizens. Of those, 3 are professors at the American University of Beirut. One of the Americans, Terry Anderson, an Associated Press correspondent, has been in captivity for 3 years. U.S. efforts to secure the release of the hostages are continuing. Among established Arab governments in the Middle East, there is increasing concern about the spread of a largely Iranian-inspired revolutionary Shiite ideology that sees the whole Muslim world as its constituency, especially the oppressed Shiite communities in other countries. Ironically, it was Israel's invasion in 1982 that provided the opportunity for Iran to send its revolutionary guards to Baalbek to protect the Shiites in Lebanon. And here again, Syria was helpful. It allowed the entry of the Iranians, and in a sense, protects them today. Why? Not because the Ba'athist regime in Damascus sympathizes with their fanatic neighbors, far from it, but because Iran and Syria have one thing in common. They both hate Iraq. And having Iran more or less on its side does give Syria a little more clout with its Arab neighbors. The nature of this revolutionary Shiite movement is certainly one of today's most fascinating questions. As a destabilizing force throughout the Middle East, West Asia, and North Africa, it could very directly impact our lives in the West. Next week on Cross Currents, a gripping film shot inside Iran reveals the attitudes and mindset of post-revolutionary Iran. The title of the film says it all, Paradise of Martyrs. Here's a preview.
It is not in everyone's destiny to go to the front, and it is not in everyone's destiny to be injured if they do go to the front. What has happened to my brother is a blessing. Now, if I can't be of service here, then my place is at the front, and I have to accept becoming injured or even becoming a martyr.
Aren't you afraid?
It's an honor to be martyred. It's an honor that everyone moves towards. People don't run away from it in fear. If our leader tells us not only my children, but the entire family will sacrifice their lives for Islam. In order to preserve Islam, the lives of my children are worthless. My entire family is worthless. I am willing for my entire family to be destroyed, but for Islam to be victorious. If people in the West can't understand this, it's because they lack in knowledge, and they lack in understanding. They don't know any better.
الله أكبر خمینی رهبر بلند الله أكبر خمینی رهبر الله أكبر خمینی رهبر مربر آمریکا مربر آمریکا مربر اسرائیل مربر اسرائیل مربر شوروی مربر شوروی جنگ جنگ دادی.
Paradise of Martyrs. Next week on Cross Currents. If you'd like to do some further reading on tonight's program, or any program in this series, we've prepared some viewer's guides to help you do that. You can write or phone us for single guides or for the full set if you wish. I think you'll find them worthwhile. For Cross Currents, I'm Jim Carney. Good night.
Viewers' guides for each program in the Cross Currents series are available at a cost of $2 each, or $15 for the full set of 10. You can obtain your guides by writing to The Knowledge Bookstore, Post Office Box 94,000, Richmond, BC, V6Y2A2. If you prefer, you can phone the bookstore at one of these numbers, 660-2190, or toll-free, 1-800-663-9711. And you can charge the order to your Visa or MasterCard. Once again, the cost of these informative guides is $2 each, or $15 for the set of 10. Order yours now.